This one terrifies me. I'm going to be purposely kind of vague about this since I'm figuring the events in this story are rare. Edit. The stories told in the comments have now made me realize this happens fairly often, and that's very tragic. The events are also mostly speculative, since there weren't any witnesses. I say this to spare you all the multiple probably yes and most likely yes that would otherwise be in this post. This is how it was told to me. A family member of mine is friends with a man, middle-aged, whose wife sadly died while taking their dog out for a walk through a rural area they were visiting. They had driven up to a farm along the road and gotten out when the dog tore from her grip and ran off. She ran after it to the back of the barn, where the huge open, dung cistern was. The farmer wasn't home, so when he came back later in the day, he found her car and thought it weird that a strange car had just been left there, doors open, with no people noticeably nearby. He went around searching for his unexpected visitors and eventually found them. What he found was something I had never even imagined before hearing of this. The dog had fallen into the cistern of deep, liquid waste from the farm animals. The edges on the cistern were way too high up to reach from liquid surface level, and the woman must have panicked, because she had jumped in after the dog to save it, and that's where her life slowly and brutally came to an end. The fumes that accumulate from that much dung are very toxic. The woman, after being unable to get back out, had lost consciousness and drowned, along with her dog, in a pool of cow shit. I can't imagine a worse way to die. I think about it now and then and hope that no one will ever die like that again. Poor souls. My mom didn't tell me this story for the longest time, I think just so she wouldn't unnecessarily worry me when I was younger. But my parents split up when I was about 4 years old, and my mom and my sisters stayed in a small townhouse for a few years before moving in with my stepdad. Anyway, while we were at the townhouse for I think less than a year, my mom heard something in her room in the middle of the night, and when she woke up to go look, there was a man in her room. She audibly gasped and got out of bed either to fight or run to our room. She couldn't really decide cause she was pumped full of adrenaline. The guy ended up running out of our back door, and when the police came they found signs of forced entry. She never told any of us the full story cause we were still sound asleep the entire time, but she ended up explaining more of it the older we got at it. Sorry for not explaining more. A lot of people have asked me to finish the story, so here goes. We never found out who it was. The police weren't able to either. Their best guess was that he broke in to rob the place. God forbid he wanted to do anything else, and was just as surprised to see my mom as she was to see him. They think that he thought the place was empty and it would be an easy mark, and bailed when he came face to face with the owner. I don't regret many things in my life, but I regret this one deeply. I was leaving work, 2001 I believe, so while cell phones were common, not everyone had them. I worked in a small office building, you know those kind that rent out spaces to several small businesses. I had stayed late on day, only reason I feel as bad as I do. As I was leaving, I was the only other car in the lot. I noticed the property manager, an elderly lady and very sweet, getting out of her car next to the dumpster holding a bag of trash. I drove past her, turned the corner, and went home. This was on a Friday night. Come to find out, she didn't put her car in park. I get in Monday to the news that she was pinned between the dumpster and her car until found on Sunday. Our dumpster was not visible from any main road. Had I been 30 seconds later in leaving, I would have seen it happen. Being elderly, the low impact still pinned her and broke some bones. Even though she was found alive, she didn't make it at the hospital. I don't know if I had seen it happen I would have been able to react fast enough to warn her, jump out and push the car. It wasn't accelerating, just rolling slowly in neutral, or if I had, would have even just been able to call 911 and her injuries treatable after not being outside for 2 days. And I can't imagine her mindset. We were in a commercial area, no real reason for anyone to be immediately within earshot if she called for help. Which I'm sure she did, many times. This is a hometown story that stayed with me. It happened literally right around the corner from where I grew up, maybe a 2-minute drive away. Judy Kirby murdered 6 children and 1 adult by intentionally driving the wrong way on a divided highway in an attempt to commit suicide. She had been hospitalized for depression, but had also just ended a relationship with her ex-husband's brother and was by some reports involved in drug trafficking and fearing an imminent arrest. She picked up her sister's son, who was celebrating his 10th birthday that day. She then loaded her 3 children into the car, supposedly to pick up a gift for the nephew. Instead, she went missing with the carload of kids. A short time later, calls started coming into 911 about a car going the wrong way down the highway at a high rate of speed. They made it about 90 seconds before a head-on collision with another vehicle, driven by a father with 2 children and another child along for the ride. The crash annihilated both vehicles. The only survivors were Kirby herself, and the child who was along for the ride in the other car. There were pieces of children all over the highway. She was sentenced to 215 years in prison. I've posted this before, but when I was a baby, my dad played on a softball team. Typical social team, out for beers and pizza after with the guys, family event type thing. My parents were good friends with 2 of the other couples, both of them had young kids as well. On this occasion, the other 2 couples had left their kids at one of their houses, with a babysitter they were splitting. They invited my parents back to the house to have some more beers that night, but I was being fussy and my mom nixed the idea, though they would 100% have normally gone back to hang out. Well, it turned out my fussiness on that day saved our lives. When the other parents got back to the house, they walked in on a home invasion. 2 men had broken in, tied up the kids and the babysitter, and her boyfriend, and were waiting for the parents. Took the parents hostage as well, and made the dads drive with them to Banks, a grocery store where one dad was manager, and clear out accounts, a safe. They then came back to the house, and slaughtered both families, the babysitter, and her boyfriend. Kids included. They caught the 2 guys later on. My dad attended the trials, and said it was the first time he had ever had thoughts of supporting the death penalty. It still gives me chills to know how close we came to getting killed that day, too. Years ago when I was 8, my family lived in this big weird house kind of on the edge of a small town. The school district was in the middle of a big restructuring, so even though we were only a couple grades apart, my brother and I went to different schools and took different buses. This left me as the last person to leave in the morning and the first person to get home in the afternoon, which meant it was my job to make sure all the lights were off and the door was locked. One morning I noticed the basement door was open and the light was on, so before I left I turned off the light and closed the door. When I got home that afternoon the light was on and the door was open again. I just assumed that I'd forgotten to actually take care of it when I noticed it in the morning, so I went over to turn off the light and close the door. When I got to the top of the basement stairs I looked and there was a big shadowy male figure towards the bottom of the staircase. I freaked out, slammed the door and pushed a bunch of boxes against it and then went and hid in my closet. For months I didn't tell my family because I was positive what I had seen was a ghost and didn't think anyone would believe me. Then about a year after that incident my mom and her boyfriend realized that small amounts of money had been going missing for months, totaling around $800–900, but never more than $60 at once. So we all walked around the house with flashlights trying to figure out how they could have gotten in. Turns out some creep was climbing in through a small hole in the outside of the house, shimmying through a crawl space, then coming up into the house through the basement. Realizing I had been alone in the house with him on at least one occasion was one of the worst, most terrifying moments I've ever had. Old janitor from high school, friendly Ecuadorian man who went by Ping. Worked at the school for 20+ years and nobody had a problem with him. I guess his wife was leaving him and in the process of moving out he caught her in bed with her new man. Next day, in the middle of town, he opened fire on her, the man, and then killed himself before any cops had time to respond. The driver one of the semis we took in on trade died in the truck. The sleeping area is a bunk with a mattress that can be flipped up, and under it is a seat and a table. So during the day it's a dinette setup. And at night, you pull a lever and pull the bunk down to sleep. Well, something happened and the bunk flipped up while the driver was sleeping and it pinned him against the wall. He couldn't get it to drop back down and suffocated. He was stuck there for somewhere around 12 hours. Someone had noticed that he was parked for an unusually long amount of time for the kind of deliveries he did. The company that built the sleeper did something to the bunk so that couldn't happen again and supposedly recalled all of that sleeper style. Happened to me, have posted about it before. I was around 11 years old and I woke up in the middle of the night to a man straddled on top of me with his hand over my mouth and nose. He told me to roll over and not scream. I rolled onto the floor and tried to scream bloody murder. I say tried cause when you are truly terrified it can take a second to find your voice. My mom heard me screaming and came in and fought with the guy. He was at least 6, she was 5 feet 3 inches, and scared him enough with the fighting and screaming that he took off out the window he had come in through. Never did catch him. A headless, limbless torso was found in the bushes at the rest stop in the town where I grew up. They never found the rest of her body parts or the murderer. She wasn't even identified until about a decade later. She was a prostitute that had been estranged from her family. My mom's theory is that a truck driver from out of state did it. Dismembered her, dumped her torso at the rest stop, and scattered the rest of her over state lines. Could have been an isolated incident or it could be a serial killer. We might not ever know. My brother-in-law is a deranged heroin addict, has been for over a decade. In 2016 he murdered my father-in-law. He attacked him from behind and crushed his head/back/shoulders with a hammer over 50 times. My husband and I were out of town and he used my father-in-law's phone to text us throughout our trip. He lived with my father-in-law's dead decomposing body for over 5 days and proceeded to steal his father's belongings and pawn them, drained his bank accounts and stole his car. When we got home he fled and sent my husband a text from his dad's phone saying he wasn't feeling well and was in the bathroom. That's when my husband found the body. He's in jail now serving 24 years, but it still haunts me. Amateur rugby. Guy gets hit pretty hard and dislocates his hip. While waiting for the ambulance, a guy runs up saying he's a physio and can at least relocate the joint. He cracks the hip back into its socket and the guy screams. One of his testicles had been jolted out of place in the accident, and had been chilling out in the empty hip socket. Squish. Found a severed arm at the roadside one afternoon. I was walking to class. This was years ago, I was in 7th grade. Scared the shit out of me, never told anyone that but checked the news for it for several weeks. Didn't see anything about it. Still gives me the creeps. In 1904, 9 schoolgirls drowned in an outhouse after the floor collapsed. They literally drowned in human waste.